Another drizzly, dismal day. You're going to get sound effects from it. Enjoy. I'm going to turn the light on again, hoping for the best. Um, anyway, nice to be back. Uh, Especially since I could barely do any painting on a day as dark as this, New England being what it is, right? So the question for today comes from Gabriel, and he says, I've been reading Solomon J. Solomon's book and the Harold Speed one about oil painting techniques. I'm sure you're familiar with them. It would be really interesting to hear your opinion about those books. Harold Speed has a very interesting chapter where he talks about how he would like the future art school to be. Yeah, I would begin by simply reminding myself of how important reading is like this. And so when I was with Gamel, actually, it was the first person I met that actually had a reading list. Actually, he said I was the first person who asked him for his reading list of his students. But I was hungry as could be, of course. And I had some instinct that painters said things, except I never saw anything. I don't know if I saw a quote from anybody or heard one from anybody in the several years I spent at the Art Students League. But when I got to Gamel, he was a guy just so completely dominated in his way of teaching by aphorisms, but literally by quotes, what you might call the axiomatic expressions of other painters. Alfred Stevens was full of them. Bonnat has, the Bonnat rule. The Bonnat rule is make it as like as you can the first time. It's an academic rule, but it actually applies better to the Impressionist. Make it as like as you can the first time, and then make it more like. So it got me a little bit hungry, and I began to read. And among other books that Gamel had there were those two books, the Harold Speed and the Solomon. But I found them not helpful, and I'm going to tell you the reason is pretty simple, and that is that Gamel was teaching. And unless somebody is teaching exactly what you're reading in that book, all it'll do is confuse the heck out of you. So if you guys are out there in the blue, and don't have any help in it of any kind, read those books and try to make sense of them. But if you're working with somebody, oh, gee, please don't. I have students from time to time, and I can't figure out what they're doing in front of me. But what they're doing is they're copying something out of a book somewhere. Like they'll come in doing bark drawing or construction drawing, and I'll say, well, are you in my studio or what are you doing? And that doesn't happen very often because I set people up and tell them what we do and why. But still, it's funny because somebody will pick up in the middle of the year trying to improve their drawing. They'll start drawing in an entirely different way, from a wholly different mindset. And when you're working with an individual person, you got to work within that. Your struggle is to understand that mind, to get that mind in yourself, that person represents. I like to say represents a mind, because it's a bigger mind than the individual. The mind of. So in fact, when I was searching through, trying to find painting, trying to find my way, it was a constant question. What is the nature of this thing? And they sit there. They sit there in your mind. They weigh on you, right? Isn't it true? And so, underlying all things is this idea that we're going to actually say. I'm getting distracted by a cat. You forgive me for a second. I'm losing my train of consciousness. Train of thought. Let me back off a little bit. The axiomatic stuff, read the books. They're full of gold. They're all kinds of gold. And some of it applies. Some of it applies in big ways. And therefore it's useful. Other ones are very specific to a particular person's method. And these methods, individual methods, are different from each other, and they climb all over each other sometimes. Somebody will say, start from the darks. I say, start from the lights. And I'm talking impressionistically now, just laying in spots of colors. Start with your lights. Well, why do I say that? Why did he say that? But if you want to, you got to follow through with the guy when you're studying with him. So you don't want to be not following through and not getting what the person who's teaching you has to say in front of you. So you read a book and the guy says start with the darks, and you start with the darks. Your teacher will probably tolerate it, but it's going to be more and more difficult for him to actually get his information through to you. So I'm just saying that. Books, though, amazing stuff in books written by painters, and those two are perfectly good books. The second difficulty I had with those particular two books was, and it's typical of all how-to books in painting, is there's so much reading between the lines, except when somebody's being totally simplistic. And And it takes a huge amount of experience, unless there's somebody next to you who's written that book, and he's showing you with his, he's pointing at something or making marks on your canvas, where it makes a big, big difference. But that's really a classic problem of a student. Most students come in without a vocabulary, really, in one sense. And so those books are way over their heads for that reason. But that's not a reason not to read them. Read them and read them again, and wonder, And if you're all, as I said, on your own, apply one of those ways of working for a little bit and see how it gets you, as to the best of your ability to do that. But I better get back and figure out this. The question. But the cool part of this question, and so both these guys have fun stuff. One of in the Solomon book, I used the solecisms on composition. I'm always impressed when some of these guys, I think in the Speed book, he talks about composition. He says basically you can't teach composition. I mean, something rather like that. Sargent actually says you can't teach color. I mean, there are things I can't even believe I hear painters say from time to time. And I certainly, even in the category, one time I was listening to Robert Hunter do a demonstration, and he said you can't teach taste. Well, you may not be able to teach somebody taste, but experience will give them taste. If they aren't just completely numb, it's like eating, You have a variety of, just say wine. Just drink wines. After you've done a few, you begin to realize these aren't very good wines. What is that? Well, it's the development of taste, and taste is developable, That doesn't mean everybody will do it. Some people don't even, in a sense, want to. They're more mechanic-minded or something, even in our paint world. And so they're not visually attuned, which is where taste, all that taste stuff comes from, To actually, it's surprising to me always how few Western painters have what I'd call true color qualities. I mean, really beautiful color relations, like Robert Douglas Hunter has. The guy's a terrific colorist, and unlike any still life painter I've seen today, actually. And there are a lot of them have been around, but I'll tell you what, I can't even teach it to you. You have to spend a lot of time studying painting and trying to make better pictures before you begin to understand Bob Hunter. But one of the things about Bob, that model, and I'm going to go on and on all the tangents here, but before I get to my one point, there's something to be said. People pick on the still life form, but there's something to be said for settling in on one thing and really, really working it over, really, delving to the depths, And he really did that with still life, and a very limited type of still life at that, right? I mean, almost every design he makes is a pyramid, but he's so good at figure grouping and color play and pattern making. The guy's it's just exquisite. It's a delight. But I mean, I remember seeing his things, not thinking they were bad when I was young, but I remember not liking this or not liking that in some fussy little way, And some of what we fussed about was the edges. I actually asked him about his edges once, and he simply said, after looking at painting for so many years, I realized that virtually nobody really cares that much about good painters we're talking about. And he, to some degree, was probably talking about Paxton. They aren't fussy, they aren't fine about things like edges. Their thoughts are bigger than that. And yet there's a quality of edges that's it's a taste phenomena as well. Things like edges. I just talked about the joints where this object hits the wall, touches the wall, so to speak, and that's what happens. Do you build up ridges? Do you, or do you have a fluid line, a wet transition? Beautiful. Is it beautiful to look at? So, how did I get off on that? All right, Solomon. But the solecisms by Solomon, those things to avoid in painting, what he calls the negatives, it's a really good little bunch of things, I think, toward the end of the chapter that he has on composition. Well worth your time. You've got to know that. In fact, I would recommend you take his list and then build on it. Are there other things to avoid? You've heard them all. I mean, somebody says if you're doing a profile of a mountain, make sure it doesn't look like a man's face, because that's what it'll be the rest. It'll just look like you're being a joker. And those are kinds of things to avoid. There are things like that, but he talks about very specific things, specifically related to equality, too much equality and that sort of thing, or the problems of equality in pictures as opposed to the variety, the order of domination and what would you call that? The ranking of size, shall we say, the varieties, shape types, things like that. So I'm saying too much. What's interesting, though, is that comment that Gabriel brings us to a really, really good point, and that is about that school. It was, I was reading that, I'd forgotten that he'd said it, but I teach a composition class now, and the way I teach it is exactly what, he would have said, yeah, let's do a class like that in my school, right? But what did he say? The only thing I think, I'm hoping what Gabriel actually liked about what he said, and I don't know if I picked up anything else actually, and that is that a school ought to be run on the basis of, and he does mean just teaching ought to be run on the basis of, and everybody says schools, everybody's doing schools, they're doing academies. I agree with Gammo, it's not the academies, get out of it, just start being a discipler, teach somebody, take somebody seriously and bring them along, get somebody who really likes your work and respects your knowledge, bring them along, take responsibility for making them the next generation, like children, or like offspring. And get over this school thing. I mean, you're treating painting like it's something it isn't when you do that. It's a bunch of little sort of odd facts here and there. And there's no blood in that. So I'm being off now. So let me shut up here. But the school is a different issue. But his point was there are three things that make up the content of the visual world, and that which means the world of art. And they are what he calls form, which is everything to do with the spatial. It's line. It's roundiness, you know what I mean? It's distances between things, all that stuff, all the spatial content. And there's values, which is the dark to light, and that whole thing we call tone, that play of tone. And then there's the color portion. And those are the components. That is the stuff. And I found, an analysis of composition, and unfortunately it hasn't been done. That's one of the things that disappoints me about both of those guys is he says that and then he doesn't do it with composition. But what are the three things, and in the abstract sense of it, which is what he's talking about, what are the three visual phenomena that you have to actually have unity from or with or in painting? And they are those three things. You have to have valuistic unity, the values have to be playing to each other. The color thing has to be a color scheme. We use a word like color scheme. It means the colors are of a piece, and they're all in unity. All the variety in the world, but wonderfully in unity, right? And then lastly, the linear aspect of it. And when you're talking, Jerome, he talks about the main line of a composition as a main line. Well, what does that mean? But that's the linear aspect. That's the beginning of your knowledge about the linear aspect. So there's a unity around line, what I would like to call something like gesture and things like that. So it's very interesting that he does that, and I think that's very insightful, Gabriel, that you picked that up because it's true. And I do hope that I can get more of my information out there about composition because it's so fundamental. It's so way down there. But get good at those things, yeah. Get good at color and color relations. Be good at making colors, matching colors. Study nature. And be good at every other aspect of the visual world. Be good at things like values and their relationships. They say how light effects are produced, how space is produced. How distance in front and back is created in a picture. And finally, how all those things related to pattern and it's funny because I'm here talking about this, and yet I have to say, they're separate entities, and yet you've got to see them all as a piece. You have to actually work with them all simultaneously. You do one, and then for a while, and then you realize there's another one that's a piece of that, and before you know it, so you're in and out of these three different aspects of painting as you work. It's really well described. I've mentioned it before. Look at Hale's book on Vermeer, way early on, maybe page 15 in the book. But he talks about it's everything. Everything is drawing, rather. The color's drawing, everything's drawing. I mean, there's another way of saying it. That everything is incorporated. Everything is simultaneously involved, and nothing can be done without the other thing, right? I mean, like an example of that is one of the earliest things I learned post-Gamel, once I began to really watch drawing and see what was happening, is that shapes are not cutouts. The shape, say, of my hand here, if it has a shadow on it over on the side over here, it'll probably be a sharp edge over here and a turning edge over here, and you will not make that shape right without the turning edge over here. And so people say, well, how in the heck would you do that then, right? Yeah, but we do have ways. And what you're really saying is that there has to be a sort of a linearity. In other words, you do shape. That's a different thing from doing form. It's true. And that's what I'm saying, though. Don't you see that you'll never really fully see the shape without the form? Yes, you do have to separate them in your mind and do one and get the other. You have to make sure when you're getting one, you get it. And when you're getting, but then when you realize that you only are getting an idea of it because the look of nature isn't the same, then you'll do the other and look at the shape again. But that's the sort of stuff I can say to you. So Gabriel, yeah, keep reading, guys. I mean, follow the lists I put out there as far as that goes. First is a good read. Who is that? Collier is a good read. There's a bunch of Brits that were Royal Academy guys. Sir Joshua Reynolds, is important. Sir Joshua Reynolds is the guy who says genius lies in seeing the thing as a whole. He also said, by the way, that a person who can paint a still life can paint anything. And there are people who think that the still life school isn't the way to go. They don't know what they're talking about. And I will say it this way. The still life school is where you learn to do everything. If you're in a school where you're just doing figures and portraits, you're not doing anything. You're painting apples over and over and over again. That's all you're doing. You're not making pictures. It's one of the things I loved about Gamel's school. He said, I'm teaching picture making. This is a picture making place. Well, picture making and like what we did at the Art Center, we just drew a figure this day, we drew a portrait that day, a figure this day. So it was just one person sitting in a chair, blah, 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 day after day after day after day. And there was no way of setting up a still life or creating a true interior. I mean, we'd all get sort of hungry for it, and we'd start putting other people in the background. But in all reality, all you're doing in those kinds of places is studying one object. And you can learn a bunch from one object. And if you approach it the way we ultimately do with Gamel, for example, even, when you do a figure, you actually do all the stuff related to the background. You don't just do the figure, because otherwise what are you doing? You're forever studying the figure, which is a good thing to study. And it's a good thing to study forever, actually. But it's so far short of all the essentials, And I'm talking about the nature of composition, the difficulty of drawing objects in and out of each other, and then making them great individually. Those kinds of processes. You've already run into them if you're any kind of a student. You already know that that's true. So yeah, I don't know how good my grammar has been today. I feel like a second-rate grammarian, but I'm already up to 17 minutes. I'm out of here, and I've been told not to go this long. But you leave me alone, and what do you expect? I don't have producers waving at me today. Look, like, comment, share, subscribe, and thank you again for your nice comments in the past and your good questions. And we have a couple more really, really good ones, and the last couple have been terrific. So stay tuned, and see you again.